Okay, you know there's North America in the north and South America in the south, and Central America is in between. And Honduras is in the middle of Central America. Okay? And it has one part that is on the Caribbean and one part that is on the Pacific Ocean. Okay? And the neighboring countries are Guatemala and El Salvador. And so let me take a policy like migration, because that one's been in the news a lot. You know that our government does not want a lot of people, a lot of migrants coming into the United States illegally. And so part of the job of the embassy in Honduras, the ambassador in Honduras, is to try to smooth the way so that encourage the local government to take some actions that will make it so that fewer people migrate in an illegal way. Okay, definitely that's part of it. That's a very complicated question because sometimes it's law enforcement, but sometimes it's by helping with programs that will make it possible for poor people to earn enough money that they can stay at home. Or sometimes it's a matter of working with law enforcement so that if the local people are subject to a crime, like, you know, they're extorted or something like that, that the local government has the capacity to go look for the criminals and prosecute them and maybe put them in jail. And so all of that is the original policy came from Washington, but how you develop it is up to each embassy under the leadership of an ambassador. So that's one example. There's another one, which is business conditions, trying to make it possible for there to be more U.S. trade with a country or more U.S. investment in a country. And so that an embassy would work with the local government to try to make that possible. Sometimes not in a policy way, just by trying to solve a particular business's problems. But a lot of times by having some sort of dialogue with the government or with the people to talk about what are the obstacles, what are the impediments to having more business between the countries. So that's another example. The drug trade in Honduras, a lot of cocaine goes from South America through Honduras and then further north, with the destination market being the United States. And that's very bad for Honduras, and it's not terrific for the United States. And so we worked a lot on that kind of thing. Okay, there's a lot more policy that we do, but it's policy all the time.
All right, let's go back to Lame Deer. Lame Deer, do you have a question? And then after we answer Lame Deer's question, we're going to go to Drummond.
Okay, so go ahead, Elaine, just so she can see you. You have to move kind of towards the... Okay.
How did you get your job?
How did I get my job?
Yeah.
This is the most kind of democratic thing you can imagine. You get your job by taking an exam. Honest to God. You first take a written exam. It's free. It's offered all over the United States about 3 times a year. And if you pass that exam, then there's an oral exam. The first one's written, takes about 3 hours. The second one is oral, takes all day. You do have to know a lot, but we don't care whether you have a degree or not. So if you learned it all on your own, that's fine. And it's, you know, if you read some of the big newspapers in the United States that have some international news, that is very good preparation. They, like the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times, or there are many, many others that carry international news every day. And if you read those international news articles, that will give you a big heads up. But they also test things that are very practical, because in the State Department, there are the people who their specialty is politics or their specialty is economics, but there are also people, there are three more specialties you can have. One is called management or administrative. It's basically making sure that the embassy has all the supplies that it needs and that the plumbing works and that, you know, if it's getting shipments in from somewhere, it can get those shipments in. That's, and all the personnel questions. So this exam would have some questions that are very practical, that are kind of the same as in a business. You know, how would you make sure the embassy has what it needs? And then there are the consular people, and those are the ones with the passports and the services for American citizens, and they do visas. And then there's another group, and they do, you could think of it as public relations. They do cultural things, like, well, you know, can we bring in a dance group from the United States or a music group from the United States so we can show what we have in the United States to local people. And that part is, you know, so that the peoples of our country get along better. They just know more about each other. That's actually the most fun specialty you could have, probably. So the exam, that you just take the exam and it covers all those different areas. If you want, if you're curious, you could either Google the words Foreign Service Exam, or you could go to the website state.gov. State is for U.S. Department of State, okay? State.gov. And then just look on the website there and it will get you to where the exam is. There are practice exams so you can see. And if you don't pass, you can take it again. You can take it as many times as you want. So no harm done at all. So that's how you get in. Are you curious about who gets in?
We didn't catch that. Could you say it again?
Are you curious about who gets in?
Gets in?
Like how someone gets in?
Yeah. So they just lots of regular people take the test. They have all different backgrounds. The State Department is really trying to have diplomats, foreign service officers, who look like the United States. So they can be, you know, every race, every gender, everything, including a lot of children of immigrants. Sometimes, a lot of times, the people who take the test have some foreign exposure. You know, they grew up in a home with where foreigners or immigrants live. Sometimes they had gone overseas and they knew something about it, but not always. In recent years, they get a lot of people who are sort of up for adventure. And I say that because a lot of the people the State Department ends up selecting or where they're going to send these people are to places that are kind of hard to live in. They're not as comfortable. They're developing countries. But it's still fun. It's still interesting. It's just harder. And so you kind of have to be somebody that's kind of curious about other places.
Thank you. Let's go to Drummond and see if you have a question.
Did you ask your question? Yeah. Lexi has a question for you. Can you step into the screen? Yes, so that they can see on the screen.
What part of Honduras did you enjoy the most?
What something did I enjoy most?
Can you speak up a little bit?
What part of Honduras did you enjoy the most?
Oh, what part of Honduras did I enjoy most? That's easy. Honduras has some islands called the Bay Islands. One of them is Roatan. Actually, I'm going to give you two answers in Honduras. One of them is Roatan. Roatan is in the Caribbean, and it sits on the second longest coral reef in the entire world. The longest one is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and the second longest is in Honduras and Belize. And so if you like to snorkel or you like to go scuba diving, you can do it there. And we did. So, you know, you go under the water, you see like eels and all these incredible, beautiful Caribbean fish and lobsters and shrimp, all this stuff. Very cool. The other place that was my favorite place to go was called Copan, C-O-P-A-N, Copan. Copan was an ancient Mayan city, like the Mayas. You know, maybe you've heard of the Aztecs, the Mayas, and the Incas, which were all indigenous civilizations that existed more or less between 0 and 1200 AD. Well, the Mayas were the ones that were famous for their writing systems and for their astronomy. They had calendars, and they also had governments that did administrative things. And so they have, Copan has pyramids, and one of the pyramids has, along each step up the pyramid, they have the history of a dynasty. There were like 15 different dynasties. So if you like climbing around and learning about ancient civilizations in archaeology, Copan is a fabulous place to go. And they're still doing the research to find out more about how the Mayas lived. You might have heard about the Mayas once because in their calendar had cycles. And I think they were, if I remember correctly, those cycles were about 60 years long. And they thought the world would end and according to their calendar, it was supposed to end in 2012, but happily it didn't. But anyway, there was a lot of publicity around that time for the Mayas. And the way I got interested in international stuff, originally, one of the ways was because my family took me to see some Mayan sites, a different one in Guatemala. And I was about 12, and I really liked being able to climb up and try to figure out just how these people lived and what they were doing, and, you know, look out. It was really beautiful too. Lots of, you know, trees. The pyramids went higher than the trees. That was very cool. And so it was like a big jigsaw puzzle to figure out about this group of people. And so when I got to Honduras and had the chance to go see Copan, I was like over the moon. It was so exciting for me.
That's wonderful. Do you mind if we do one more round of questions?
Sure.
Okay, great. Let's go back to Sydney. I am so sorry, Sydney. Sydney.
Okay, so after you took your exam, did you like pick Honduras, or were you assigned it, or how did that exactly work?
Right. So when you first get into the State Department, they say, okay, tell us, here's a list of countries you could go to. Tell us which 10 countries you'd be, you know, most interested in going to of the list. To be honest, usually there aren't 10 you really want to go to. But anyway, you have to write down 10. And then they select one of those countries, and that's where you go. So that's how you get your first assignment. Then after that, it's a little bit like looking for a job, but when you're already inside the organization. So you bid on assignments. You know, you say they'll have a big bid list. Here's everything that's opening up. The military has kind of a similar system. Here's everything that's opening up in this time frame when your tour is going to end. So you can, you know, indicate like 10 places where you know 10 of these jobs you would be interested in being considered for. But then you actually have to contact those offices and make sure they know that you're really seriously interested, and you just try to make yourself known, just like any job you would apply for. And so it's a little bit of what do they need and what do you want to do. And over time, what happens is you get to be better known among the people that work in, say, one part of the world versus another. Like maybe you get to be known by the people, you know, all the people that work in the Americas, or all the people that work in Asia or in Europe. And so it gets to be easier and easier to find a job in that part of the world. So that works, that system works pretty well until you get up to being ambassador. And then being ambassador is has a little bit of the same thing, but they're really picking you, and you have to be acceptable to the White House, and you have to be acceptable to the senior most parts of the State Department. And so you can indicate your interest, and there's a lot of paperwork you fill out where they're trying to assess, do you have the skills that they think are needed to deal with the issues in one country or in another country. And then they come up with a list of potential candidates that come from the different areas of the State Department, and they figure out who they want to put in what job. So there are about maybe 700 or 800, I can't remember. No, not that many ambassadors, but there are that many senior level people who are applying for maybe 40 or 50 positions each year. And so it's very competitive to get that. And you do have to be well known in many parts of the State Department in order to get one of those jobs.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, let's go back to Lame Deer.
So I have a question. What is the most challenging thing you experienced being an ambassador?
The most challenging, I'll give you two different types of answers for that. And this is actually one of the good things about the State Department, you can be given a lot of freedom and a lot of responsibility very, very early when you're overseas, depending on what happens. So, for example, in my first tour, I was sent to Mexico City, and they had a gigantic earthquake. It was like 8.1 on the Richter scale. And then the next day they had an aftershock, which was 7.9 on the Richter scale. And so my bosses asked me to help out with the help that the U.S. was sending after the earthquake, so earthquake relief. And I met the dog teams that came and some other teams that came at the airport, and they arrived on a weekend, but the U.S. Embassy was closed, and the Mexican government, of course, was closed. But of course, if you're going to be looking for people who got buried by the rubble, you know, you want to start right away. And so one of the hard things was to figure out how to do that, especially because I was a first tour officer, so I had never done anything even remotely like that. But, you know, you get these chances and you rise to the occasion, and we established a really great system, and we even got people from other countries, teams from other countries joining what we were doing. So that was one thing that was really, one type of thing that was really hard, just dealing with a situation you've never seen, and not really having been taught this is what you do. The second thing is there are issues that are just intractable. They're really, really hard. So like all this drug trade that was running through Honduras, and the Honduran government was not very good at making their borders safer or cracking down on the narco traffickers or anything like that. And so there was a lot of corruption in that country. And so the question was, what the heck can you do to make it so that the Honduran government is more interested in doing something, and what is it that you can figure out to do together with that country? And so when you have an intractable problem like that, that it's hard to do. But I mean, we had some success. Like we did a number of things where all of a sudden they were able to send their narco traffickers, the big ones, to the United States for, to face the law face the courts in the United States, because in Honduras, those courts weren't working. It wasn't happening. And that took a lot of work, but the result of it was that a lot of the drug cartels in Honduras, the big ones at the time, have been dismantled. So that's a big thing, but it took a lot of effort, and it was a very complicated story. So those are two of the hardest things.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Drummond. Oh, hold on, I can't hear you. I think I unmuted the wrong microphone. Let's try again, Drummond.
So wait till this.
Bye.
Okay. Drummond, we're ready for you.
What was the scenery like in Honduras?
What? I didn't understand the question. Can you say it again?
What was it like?
I'm sorry, one more time.
What was the scenery like in Honduras?
Oh, the scenery. Oh, that's actually a really good question, because Honduras is different from all the other countries in Central America because it's mountainous, and not super tall mountains. I mean, nothing like you have here in Montana, but it is mountainous, and it has a lot of greenery. It also has some areas that are subject to drought, and it has some beaches. But the thing that's interesting about the mountains in Honduras was that their major business city is called San Pedro Sula, and that city, because of the mountains, and they didn't have very many roads, it was very hard to get to the capital of the country. And so if you were wealthy enough in San Pedro Sula, you actually did more of your business, or you sent your kids to school in the United States, because it was easier to cross the water than to cross the mountains. So that's part of the history. It's part of why the U.S. has been, the U.S. and Honduras have had a relationship for a long time, since the mid-1800s.
So I have a question for you, and we're just about out of time. But I'd like to end on, what is your advice for these students if they're interested in pursuing a career with the State Department? What should they be thinking about?
Okay, what should you be thinking about if you're interested in pursuing a career? The first thing is to pay attention to your own environment and give a little bit of thought. I can give you a couple of hints right now, but a little bit of thought to how many times something from another country impacts your life. And the ones I'll mention are like the clothes you wear. There's a pretty good chance they were made overseas. Or the car you drive. The car may be made in the United States, but it may be made from parts made all over the world. Or I mentioned the drugs. Or I mentioned the migration, poor people facing violence who come to the United States because they're trying to have a better life. Just pay attention to your own environment and think about this connection between local and global, because it's bigger than you think.
Can I interrupt for just 1 second? I'm curious. So we have Sydney and we have Drummond. With a show of hands, how many of you are in a ranching or agricultural family?
Okay.
Okay. So Montana, yeah, could you speak a little bit about Montana exporting?
So Montana grows some wheat, I think. And wheat is one of the exports that you have to Central America. So that's another one of the connections. I think Guatemala is interested in importing beef, and U.S. beef is really good. I don't know if I assume you have beef here too, so that would be another connection. So the business connection is great. Plus, they have recipes that you may want to use up here that are good, grill and stuff like that. So, yeah, so there are a lot of connections. So that's the first thing. Just look at your own life, and it's not going to jump right out at you, but just pay attention when you just look at a local newspaper, see what's going on, see how many immigrants there are around you, and if it's not in your exact town, maybe, or do you know a foreign student, anything like that. The second thing is pay attention to the news, or start to learn about other countries. The basic thing is I studied anthropology in college. People have the same basic desires. Everybody wants their family, their kids to be better off than they were. They want to have, be comfortable enough in their life. They want to find some love. They want to make a little bit of money. That's the same anywhere in the world. So people start out being basically the same, but it runs through different cultures. It comes out in different ways. So it doesn't have to be politics or economics that you read. It could be art. It could be get you interested in the music, anything to start, any country that sort of piques your interest, start learning about it. The third thing is do try to learn a little bit of history. If you're going to do policy, it helps to know what some of the mistakes were that people made before, or what worked well about what happened. So, why did World War II happen? That'd be a good thing to know. Or, have we always gotten along with Russia? Was it always Russia? That kind of thing. And then finally read newspapers, and then like I said, just take the Foreign Service exam. You can go online and find out when it's offered, and definitely work with your teachers and, and the librarians, and, figure out where you can get more information. So that's what I would say. It's really fun. It's very, exciting. It's like, if you like traveling in the United States, you might like traveling overseas too. And you get a chance to learn about another country more in depth than you would, than if you just go as a tourist. So it's very meaningful work. I mentioned that earthquake thing. We saved people's lives. That's the most important thing, I think, for me, that I've ever done in my life. And I did it, at the very beginning of my career. So, give it some thought. Might be for you. And like I said, there are lots of different career paths within the State Department, within the Foreign Service. You could even be a doctor or a nurse and be in the Foreign Service, or a security specialist and be in the Foreign Service, because they hire all these people.
Wonderful. Yeah, go ahead.
Very good. Well, Ambassador Kubiske, thank you so much for joining us here, and to all of the students out there all across Montana, thank you all for joining us today. I have one just very quick question for the Ambassador. I believe this is your second time in Montana?
It is.
Could you share any impressions about this visit, about Montana and Montanans, please?
Well, first of all, I love it. The mountains are extraordinary. The sky is extraordinary. The sense of space and freedom is extraordinary. It's way different than living in Washington, D.C., where I live, which is a very crowded place. And I've met the most interesting people here, and I've been so impressed by the students that I met in the Academic World Quest. What they knew about the world was, it kind of blew me away. Because, you think of Montana as remote, but these were extremely plugged in kids. And so I've really liked it. You should be really proud of of your state.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you for joining us. You're always welcome out here in Montana. Thanks again to our very generous sponsors who make all of these things happen, and our partners here at Inspired Classroom. Thank you all, and have a good day.